I'm Rich Lund, just a guy who sometimes has a mohawk trying to help out the monarch butterflies. And today I'm aiming to help some things out, maybe smooth some things over, and provide some food for thought about a topic that was brought up to me by Emily Wayland and Bees and Reverie Radio in a recent interview that I did. As a full shout out, Emily and some others have put together a pretty interesting podcast. It's got episodes on YouTube, the listening kind, and links to the 2 interviews that I've done with them are available in the description below. The podcast information is pretty fun and interesting and goes beyond just monarch conservation, but takes a look into further things about pollinator conservation, gardening, native versus invasive species. A whole lot of great information's there. So check it out and hey, subscribe if you dig it. The most recent episode of theirs that I was a part of, the summer special number 4, Should We or Should We Not Rear Monarchs? We definitely delved head first into that topic and really fleshed out a lot of it. Check it out if you want the full meat on the bone. But even so, even after such a thorough discussion, there were still things about that topic that I wanted to flesh out here, expand upon, and possibly help out. Well, the topic to kind of address here, and what was brought up a bit more in the interview, was the idea that on some message boards, there are some people, sometimes, who are very adamantly against the rearing of monarch butterflies. Now, I wasn't completely oblivious to this. Over the years, some comments have come my way. I knew some of these arguments that were out there, and to address some of them, I made an episode in 2018 called Should We Continue? As always, link is in the description below. Still, that interview elicited the idea that really in 2025, there's a bit more that we can discuss. And in addition, perhaps it's convenient to have all in one place what are the current objections to the rearing of monarchs, and what are the counter-arguments that perhaps resolve the debate. And notice I said the word resolve. That doesn't necessarily mean that once you're done, everybody agrees with each other. It just means we've come to the resolution. It's that agree to disagree on certain areas. But at least then we can understand where we're coming from. So these are my take on the objections, and this way you know, should you choose to adopt my take, well, what is the thinking and the reasoning behind it? Those things are always important to show. That way others can examine your flow of thought, and even if they do object to it still, they can at least see what logic led you to your conclusion. It's important to do in science. But taking the time to fully understand arguments, whether it be an argument that you are supporting or an argument that you are against, that's a step closer to finding what common ground you guys do have. And even if you still disagree, at least with the mutual understanding, that does tend to downgrade and relieve tensions. And so maybe this will help, or so I hope. It's important to understand that within the conservation and hobbyist and just overall enthusiast of monarch categories, well, you have a whole lot of passionate people. And already, that's really awesome. People that are passionately concerned and care about this animal. That's an awesome thing. And so when we do find places where we object, where we disagree, I think it's important to talk to each other about it, to definitely discuss it, and to treat these concerns with respect. I mean, this is from people who very much care about that same animal that we do. We have a lot more in common than different. But when this topic was more brought to my attention, I started looking a little bit more into these message boards and seeing what kind of discussions were already being had. And definitely I see people passionate on both sides of it. But there was also just a lot of dogma that was being thrown around. Rules or platitude statements without a whole lot of substance backing it up or explaining why. Just bottom line statements and then links to articles without real context or discussion about what did that person get out of the article, why are they linking it, what's the important part here for us to find, which really is kind of common courtesy when you send a link, at least in this academic realm. But I click on those links, I read through those papers, and sometimes the very papers or articles discussing papers that also have the links, sometimes those things are actually, when you fully read them and understand them, they are not supporting what the original person posted the link claiming it did support. Or in other cases are even refuting what that person is claiming the paper supported. It's like Wild Wild West out there. Education leads to understanding. And understanding leads to less of a feeling or a need or a reliance on dogma. Dogmatic rules don't really cover the whole picture. And as any good scientist knows, the devil's in the details. Don't send a link to an article that references a study if you haven't read that study. Don't act like you know. Okay, so, monarch rearers. What are the current objections to rearing monarchs? Before we go into those, I'd really like to start with where that interview started. One of the first questions asked was, what is my argument for rearing of monarchs? I think a great conversation starter for an interview is a great interview question. But at its heart of it, I mean, when I first heard that question, the thing I first came to mind, the thing I first thought, and what I think I said in the interview was, I didn't know I needed one. I've tried to do my best since day one of this to always make it clear, really the experience of rearing monarchs, that's something that's amazingly rewarding to yourself, to the individual, and to the monarchs who rear if you are able to up their chances to make it to adulthood. But as enjoyable as that can be, it is not a conservation effort. It's a hobby. To really help out the monarch butterfly population, the migratory populations especially, it is the restoration of habitat in North America, the planting of native milkweed and nectar-producing flowering plants. That is the #1 way to help them, and that is the conservation effort. Now, the rearing of wild-sourced eggs or caterpillars that you then take into controlled environmental containers with proper sanitation, you're rearing them responsibly, and then once reaching adulthood, you're promptly releasing. That itself feels awesome. It is awesome for that individual, and it is not a conservation effort. And it's not something that I advocate that everybody should do. But I do recognize that people are going to do it. And so I do support, I think it is a good idea that some quality, with caution, some quality information and guidance be out there. So that way people aren't stabbing in the dark. So I haven't really pointed out, but I hope it is noticed too, that in all of my videos, I'm never like, hey, you should share this with all of your friends. Get them in on this rearing of monarchs idea. The rearing of monarchs, it's not for everyone. I am not hoping that everybody who watches these videos, that everyone else in your social circle, plus your twice-removed uncle, starts rearing monarchs next summer. But I do know some people next year will. They're going to get into it. When they go typing in some search queries, I'm just hoping that some quality information can be out there for them. So I do advocate for monarch conservation, the restoration of habitat, the planting of native milkweed and nectar-producing flowering plants. I do not advocate for the rearing of monarch butterflies. It's not a conservation effort, it's a hobby. But I do advocate that if you're going to choose to engage in this rewarding hobby, that you do so responsibly. And just like any hobby, there's responsible and irresponsible ways to do it. When you're painting, hey, don't leave the lids off your paint caps. That's irresponsible. But certainly less detrimental than when animals are involved. Any hobby where animals are involved, a lot of extra care and concern should be taken, especially and particularly for that animal. So yeah, there are definitely some responsible and less responsible and straight up irresponsible ways to do it. Just like any legal hobby. You can shake your fist and say, people shouldn't do this. They're gonna. Deal with reality. I am. But I will certainly say that my videos themselves, in the presence of them, it certainly does advocate for the idea that, hey, rearing of monarchs at home can be a very enjoyable, well-rewarding hobby. And I would make the argument that this enjoyable hobby, not a conservation effort, but this enjoyable, rewarding hobby is a very quick catalyst, a gateway to the conservation efforts for having that desire of wanting to help out. You become educated about the plight of the monarch, you probably want to plant some milkweed, get some nectaring flowers in your yard or wherever you can. But in the home rearing of monarchs, it is a direct gateway into recruiting those who want to be part of a conservation effort. I myself am a clear example. But to finally answer that question, because I don't think I really ever did in the interview, what is my argument why someone should rear a monarch butterfly? Well, once we've covered, I don't think that I need to have one any more than any other hobby. I would say the argument is that perhaps you want to really enjoy a very full, engaging, rewarding, invaluable experience, and also maybe you want to save a monarch egg from that big carpenter ant that was also on the plant. And again, I don't even think you need that argument, but that's still a pretty good one. So with that covered, well, what are then the arguments against home rearing? Well, from both the interview and the internets, the different objections, they all still seem to fall into essentially two categories, similar to back in 2018. First, there's the you might do it wrong category. So these arguments, some of them include that when you're rearing monarchs that you are risking potentially hygiene issues due to overcrowding, malnutrition due to just running out of food or a lack of quality food, stress, something that could be brought on by the overcrowding, lack of sanitation, something that's made worse by overcrowding. Still, these problems, these concerns, these are all avoidable. Just like if you choose to enjoy any hobby that involves the caretaking of animals, whether it's 1 or 2 or 20, sanitation and keeping stress minimized is always necessary, always important and responsible to be doing. You should be keeping the stuff clean. I hope you are. And there's definitely videos that have tried to really flesh out these topics. Further, as showcased in multiple episodes, using multiple containers can really spread out your numbers to ideal minimized conditions, or close to it. Eliminating overcrowding itself really eliminates a whole lot of these concerns, along with the sanitation. And discussed in many episodes before you even get into this, one of the first things you need to do is make sure that you have enough milkweed to support whatever endeavor you're trying to do. Make sure that you have access to fresh milkweed and that you will be able to see these eggs or caterpillars all the way to the chrysalis stage. Do that before you're taking in any. I mean, that's just being responsible. Now also very similar to those concerns, very much in step with them, but maybe less of a concern if you're only like home rearing a backyard 1 or 2 or 3 that you found on your plants, is the idea of could you be spreading disease? This does concern sometimes the rest of the population as well. It's tough to draw the line, but if you're rearing 10 or more, and by the time if you're around 20, it probably should be happening, you want to definitely take a next level look at sanitation. The concerns of the spread of disease include things such as the MPV virus, I know that V is kind of redundant, bacterial infections, or the well-known parasite OE, Ophriocysis electroschiriha. How am I doing these days? And any other known or unknown random diseases out there. Now with that parasite OE, yes, that's definitely a legitimate concern. OE is a natural parasite that coexists out there in nature with the monarch butterfly at endemic levels, but it tends to be naturally low in temperate zones. Still, it is out there. And feeding any caterpillars that are going through your process any leaves that are tainted with OE spores will result in them becoming infected with OE. This could lead to a batch of adults that come out of your process that are infested with OE spores, if they emerge out of your process at all. Sometimes the OE infections can be so debilitating that it really is fatal for the monarch. So OE kind of has to have a balance, it can't be too good at what it does or the monarch butterfly never lives to go out and spread it some more. This is why if you're past 10, and if you're approaching and going past 20, you probably definitely should be doing this, and that is testing for OE parasites. Testing to see if the adults are infested or not prior to their release. And this is also pretty cheap and affordable to do. I mean, if you're going to go into rearing 20, I would guess you should be willing to do this, especially for the health of your monarch system. You can use a handheld microscope to do it. I got videos on it. But no, I'm not going to endorse some handheld microscope brand. Please stop asking. I got mine for about 12 bucks. They're still online, $10 to $20. The one thing I will say, you probably want one with an LED light that turns on while you use it. And if you want to really ensure not being bummed out by those test results, well, the bleach treating of leaves that you feed your caterpillars can prevent the OE from ever infecting them. And the bleach treatment of eggs can actually prevent already infested eggs from having to face their parasitic doom. But still, cleanliness, hygiene, stress, the health of the monarch, and especially the spread of disease, these are all valid concerns. But responsible rearing that includes fresh food sourcing, avoiding overcrowding, proper hygiene and sanitation, the bleach treatment of eggs and leaves, these are valid rebuttals against such objections, and actionable too, and really kind of dismantles those arguments. Now, a more recent addition to the you might do it wrong category, migratory monarchs, they need environmental cues in order to correctly develop and emerge, close out of their chrysalis in diapause, pausing their sexual development, and remain that way with also this impulse to migrate. One argument is that home-reared monarchs might not be able to migrate. They might not attain this impulse. This is a fully valid concern. Such a valid concern that in 2019, when the paper was released that really explored this topic and kind of caused a wave in the community, Raising Monarchs did a deep dive. You see, at that time, a lot of headlines or just one-line quips were saying, home-reared monarchs cannot migrate, which is oversimplified and straight up false. Typically, when this objection is brought up, there might be a link to the 2019 study that very, very thoroughly showed that environmental cues are necessary for the monarch caterpillar during development for it to be closed and emerge as an adult that has an impulse to mostly orientate itself in a southward direction when flying. And this was important enough a study that, yep, some refinement to my own home rearing process had to occur. In science, it's important to always be taking in new information, and when the evidence is there and clear, it's important to revise your practices. The thing is, many who are linking the article, many who have brought it up, haven't really fully always read it. Because if you do, as we discussed in some previous episodes, the very paper itself, part of their study also clearly demonstrates that monarch butterflies that are reared in containers outdoors, given outdoor environmental cues, they do still retain the impulse to migrate in a southward direction. That, yep, you can home rear monarchs, as long as you do it outdoors, it works. That's why it's important to read thoroughly through things before you just send out a link. Thus, with all of this kerfuffle going on, in 2019, 2 different Raising Monarch episodes were released that address this. The 2 episodes together fully and fairly dissected and delved into the study, pulling out what we could glean from it, and includes also an interview with one of those authors of that study, Dr. Mark Cronforst. Thanks again. And those episodes also show you a recreation of what kind of outdoor rearing setup they used in that study that produced results that showed migratory behavior. So check those out if you have not. But there's the first category, the you might do it wrong category. So take care of and avoid such concerns. If people have concerns about you doing it wrong, don't do it wrong. Be sanitary. Don't overcrowd. Rearing 10 or more, consider bleach treating to avoid disease spread and parasites. Later summer rearing, make sure that you have an outdoor rearing setup, so that way they can gain those environmental cues and be able to migrate. Now, the second category. This second category could be called genetic concerns. Now, most genetic concerns, the ones that are really, really valid and important to recognize, are the ones that involve monarch breeding programs. And that's not us. Yep, if people are deciding which boys and girls are getting together, and especially if it's a multi-generational breeding program, then you are definitely changing the genetics that you are going to then be placing out there into the environment. And it could be in a significant way, especially for your local ecosystem. But in terms of, again, arguments against home rearing, we're not talking then about breeding programs. We are talking about wild-sourced eggs and caterpillars that are brought in, reared to adults, and then released. But okay, giving us that we're not breeders and taking away those concerns, I am still finding online that there are some objections to those who are doing wild-sourced rearing. Essentially, these arguments boil down to the idea that home-reared monarchs, a population, a batch of them that you release, well, these are going to include individuals that are perhaps less fit for survival than if those eggs had been out there in the wild. And that, at its heart, is a genetic concern if it's a valid concern. But as you can tell, yes, I do question how valid that concern is, just as I did in 2018. Let me be more forthcoming. When I have encountered this argument, again, internet voyeur here, I'm using that term argument pretty loosely here. Usually it's just statements, dogmatic ones being made, and an argument, some claim, evidence, and reasoning isn't necessarily there to sink our teeth into and discuss. Instead, just one-liners of, don't do that, nature knows best, or survival of the fittest, but then no argument or discussion why they feel that platitude applies. So hey, let's make sure though, let's discuss this. Now, to be more fair, some are closer to building the argument by, stating really questions. Things like, aren't you subverting natural selection when you take in monarchs and rear them? Now that is an absolutely fair question because, yeah, when we take in eggs or caterpillars and we then proceed to rear them to the adult stage, that is absolutely what we are doing, intentionally. Putting them into controlled containers, even if outdoors, it's to create a barrier between them and the nasties that are out there, the predators that want to get at them. And so, yes, that does allow more to survive than what nature would deem the fittest. But for the one attempting this argument, it's still their burden to describe where is the concern. Now, to play along and to play fair, I tried to build my own steel man attack against this argument, something that is the opposite of a straw man argument. You're giving this argument the best chances that it has before you try to attack it. Steel man argument. One could say that because home rearing does produce more adults than what nature would, some individuals, and perhaps many of the home-reared stock, may have genes that wouldn't have made it. Genes that, because of how Mother Nature acts, Mother Nature would not have allowed them to make it to that stage. But notice now, and this is very important, it would be incorrect and unfair to say that the actual home-rearing process causes all of the individuals to have somehow lower quality genetics. Home rearing cannot change any individual monarch butterfly's genetics. And so someone claiming that the practice of home rearing ensures that all individuals reared have lower fit genetics for nature, well, they don't understand some rudimentary biology. The individual monarch genes are the same when you take in the egg as they are when you release the adult. It's constant, it's not changing. But come along on this thought experiment with me. Let's say we take in 100 eggs. And I am not advocating that somebody takes in such a number. I'm just saying for this thought experiment, and to keep the math easy, we take in 100 eggs from nature. Now, a typical agreed upon estimate is that about 10% of those eggs would have survived to adulthood. Now, if we hypothetically leave these 100 eggs then out there in the wild, hypothetically speaking, statistically speaking, 10 of those monarch butterflies would make it to the adult stage. The 90 others don't. They get gobbled by a lucky insect. Some are eaten as caterpillars by wasps. Give the tachnid fly a 20-plus death toll here. And so with all of this random predation and other things that take out the monarch caterpillars, well, it would be silly to presume that the 10 monarchs that do make it, that it is a guarantee that those 10 did have the absolute fittest genes of that entire 100. Some that were eaten, stepped on, gobbled, and then spat out by a bird. Some of those 90 may have had the best genes out there. But the best genes out there aren't going to really do much for you when a really hungry ladybug happens upon you molting into your second instar. Now, take that 100, and again, let's say we take that in. And let's also presume that we have a 100% success rate. all of them make it. Again, just to keep the math easy. Of those 100, once we're done with our rearing process, the 10 that would have made it to the adult stage just naturally out there in the wild, well, they still did. But so did 90 more. Now, as already pointed out, of those 90 individuals, some of them may have just as good or maybe even better genes than the 10 that would have survived out there in nature. It's a possibility. And because some hungry ant didn't gobble up one of these better fit eggs, well then that better fit collection of genes of that individual, that's still out there in the population, which sounds a little bit like a win to me. But still, take away that win. Let's pretend even that is not true. Let's say the 90 that wouldn't have made it out there in nature, all 90 of them do have somewhat less fit genes than the other 10. Again, steel man attack, right? Well, still I ask, what is the concern? Where is the problem? If these 90 are less fit, if they truly are, and they're released back out into nature, well, they are again subject to the whims of natural selection. And what does nature do with less fit genes? Weeds them out. If a monarch is slower, sluggish, has a longer response time, birds out there are hungry and many of them need to learn what that orange and black coloration means. And I would point out, once again as I have throughout this series, that migration, that is Mother Nature's ultimate fitness test for the monarch butterfly. It's required for survival and brutal each year. Of our hypothetical 90 survivors in our thought experiment, these ones that were ensured to make it to the adult stage through our rearing process, well, they still face a tremendous, brutal journey. Oh yes, survival of the fittest will be having its way with those monarchs. Now of those 90, the weak, the unfit, they don't make it for some reason or another. And in fact, again, steel man argument, let's say that all 90 of those unfit monarchs, none of them make it. Well then, we're just right back where we were at the beginning, where nature didn't let those 90 keep on going and only those 10 survived. Only the 10 best fit made it, and some hungry birds got fed along the way and learned what those colorations mean. Which, though tiny, is still a net positive. But if any of those 90 less fit monarchs do survive and make that migratory journey, knowing that plenty of wild monarchs sometimes do not, well then it really must be called into question why we deemed those monarchs as being less fit in the first place. Follow along with me. If making the migration is a requirement of survival, and we're talking about survival of the fittest, then by Mother Nature's own definition, the fittest are the ones that make the migratory journey, regardless of what humans want to say the fittest is. By nature's judgment, if you make the migratory journey, home-reared or wild, you're fit. And so I do hope you can at least see, especially for those who still object to this idea because of this avenue, why I still question its validity. I have yet to see where is the actual concern. Alright, sum this all up together. So if you do rear monarchs, and that's all you do, recognize you're a hobbyist. That's a hobbyist effort. If you also plant milkweed and restore habitat, hey, you're also being a conservationist. But the conservation effort and the hobbyist effort, they really are separate things. But home rearing monarchs isn't saving the monarchs. Please don't promote it that way. But it is saving those monarchs. And it's definitely a very awesome, rewarding experience. If you do choose to engage in this rewarding hobby, if it's legal, check your local state laws, then do so. But do so responsibly. Because there are very strong and valid concerns when proper care isn't taken, and there are videos out there that can show you how to do it. And if you ever encounter such arguments or objections against rearing, well, I do hope you feel more equipped and understand the details better. And I hope that such information can help provoke a healthy intellectual conversation rather than a heated debate in the future. And if you yourself are somebody who has objection for any of these reasons or some other reason to the rearing of monarch butterflies, I want you to know, and I'm genuine when I say this, I think you're cool. A requirement to be such a person is that you obviously must care and care passionately about monarch butterflies. Hey, me too. Whether you stumbled upon this video organically or somebody sent it to you, hey, you checked it out and you watched it up to this point. I want to thank you for that, and I hope that if you do still object, well, at least you can see the reasoning and the understanding that I have that has led me to my conclusions. That you can see the thought process why, after hearing your objection, somebody might still cordially and with all due respect object to your objections. Alright, now shake hands and let's go plant some milkweed, guys. I'm Rich Lund. I want to thank you for helping out the monarch population, and I'll see you next time.